All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. I hope everybody's in the right room, and I hope you are all having an awesome time at GDEX and Origins. This is the odds we give ourselves, how to win as a woman. My name is Susan Magnani. I these days honestly go by Zen. It's a name I identify more with, but you can call me Susan or Zen, whichever you prefer. And so I guess a little bit about me before we start. I've been at GDEX speaking for the past 5 years, since GDEX was much smaller than it is today, and before it ever merged with Origins. And I love it here. I love the sense of community and just being able to give talks. And my past talks have all focused on a very similar space to this one, which is this intersection between technology and people, or technology and philosophy, or technology and ethics. And I think that's a really interesting space that isn't talked about enough. But my current day job is as a cloud platform engineer. So I actually don't work in the gaming industry, but I ran my own game design company while I was in college. And I came out of college with both a degree and 4 years of experience between that and my 3 internships and full-time job I had in college. So I came out with quite a lot of experience and hope to talk to you today in a very interactive storytelling fashion about some morals and boundaries and just some takeaways I think that will be applicable across the board, across lifestyles, across areas of life. And I hope y'all will leave here with something you can try and get back to me if it helps you. So we're actually going to start off with a little bit of interactivity from the crowd. I wanted to know, since this is the first year that GDEX and Origins have been together, can we do a quick show of hands of who's here for GDEX? Oh, awesome, awesome. Is there anybody here for Origins? Great. Oh, wait, who's here for both? Okay. So a lot of you, I think, didn't think about that third option. And the third option was that we are here for both. And this brings me to a logical fallacy that actually we all have, and we oftentimes do not recognize it. It's what's called duality. And it is thinking of things in yes, no, black, white, good, evil. And there's only 2 answers, and they are essentially the poles of what might actually be a spectrum or a range of answers, or shades of gray. And so the flip side of duality is, so we obviously can see this doesn't work in a lot of situations once we're aware of it. The flip side of duality is actually open-mindedness. And what open-mindedness allows us to do is to evaluate others and evaluate research, evaluate reports, just evaluate the information we're getting and evaluate it for, is it something that's useful to us? Is it something that is credible? And we all evaluate credibility all the time. We don't often think of it that way, but we do. We do it all the time. And so we're actually going to start with, really, why should you listen to me? So we're going to honestly start there with credibility. Why should you listen to me? One of my favorite quotes growing up was that if you are the smartest person in the room, you should find another room. And the reason that's my favorite quote is because 2 things. So if you are the smartest person in the room, you are, by definition, you can only teach. You can no longer learn. And I personally believe that when you stop learning, you stop growing. And for me, that's a metric I set for myself, where if I'm not growing, I'm not happy. And so this is perhaps best represented by a video game from my childhood. And we played a lot of board games growing up. And one of my favorites was Clue Museum Caper. So this is a version of Clue where one person will play the thief, and the others will play the people running the museum trying to stop the thief. So the thief is trying to escape with paintings. And they can do a lot of things on both sides, a lot of different tactics to stop the other. But one of the things the thief can do is actually cut the power. And to the security cameras, to the lights, and it's a little bit hard to steal a painting when you, or it's a little bit hard to stop somebody stealing a painting when you cannot see where they are. So they just make a break for it out the window, they're gone, your painting's gone, and you're like, well, I've lost the game now. So this is a great analogy for what I just explained about being the smartest person in the room, because a lot of rooms you'll walk in and you'll find they're filled with people who claim to know everything. And nobody knows everything. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. Let's just get that straight right now. But so if you walk into a room and people claim to know everything, you should always be wary, because oftentimes you'll find that they are living like these cute Clue Museum caper people, where their lights have been cut and they're just living in the dark, right? They've stopped growing. So we should always be questioning information we're given. Is it of service to us? Is its intent to help us? And like, who is it coming from? We should always be questioning all the information. And so when I was young, like I said, I played a lot of board games, but oftentimes I was very, very competitive at these board games. And I would often end with me getting angry that I wasn't winning, and little 6-year-old me like storming away and like, oh no, I'm not winning, I'm not playing anymore. And I think this is very relatable to a lot of us. We're competitive, we're gamers, we want to win. But what this brings me to is this was not a healthy benchmark that I took into my adult life. So when I would not be winning and I'd get frustrated with myself, and I look back on that, really who I was upset with was not the opponent, it was me. It was the fact that I felt I wasn't doing good enough at this game, whatever game it might be. And so that benchmark I set for myself, I had no control over it, right? Because I can't control how the other person, their hand is dealt, or how they're, gonna play their cards, or how they're, like, I have zero control over any of that. So it's a matter of, as I've gotten older, this applies across the board. You have to look at why. Why am I unhappy with this result? Why am I unhappy with what I'm being told, or my actions, or whatever it might be? And oftentimes, if you keep asking yourself why, and you are willing to hear what you already might know, the answer comes back to you are setting the wrong metric. You are benchmarking yourself against somebody else's standards, somebody else's performance, what you think somebody else might like of you, what you think somebody else's life should look like. This applies across a lot of the way people think. And you got to start reframing that as, so who is benefiting from that way of thinking? Because it's certainly not you. It is maybe the person whose life you're benchmarking against, but if it's not serving you, this is why we analyze credibility. So this talk is going to follow a format, and I've sort of given you a little bit of it already. So we're going to go through an example of either a game or a snippet of my life, and we're going to take away like an actionable piece or like a moral from it. So we're going to get a little more fun now. We're going back. We're going to take you back to 2001, 2 decades ago. This game came out. This is one of my favorite games growing up. I was 4 years old when this came out. And so we're walking through the mall, me and my mother, and walking past the Disney store, and what do I see? This in the jewel case, CD version in the window. And I'm like, Mom, I want it. And Mom, goes into the store. It's like, Susan, this is $45. I was like, I'm 4, I don't care. I was like, I want it. And my mom was actually incredibly smart. She said to me that if I wanted it, I could save up my $2 a week allowance to buy it for $45. Long story short, I actually did that. And so I got $2 every week in allowance, and you can do the math, how long that took a 4-year-old to save up. I mean, that was really like some dedication. But I took that game home, and it was the first game I ever bought for myself. And that game still probably has the most hours out of any game I've played, simply because I spent my hard-earned time to pay for that game, and so I played the heck out of it. I could tell you where every Easter egg is in that game. But this brings me to the point of passion. So I wanted that game a lot, and I did anything and everything to make that happen at 4 years old. And so a lot of us forget that childhood mentality we had of, oh, like children, you see them and they wake up and they're excited for their day. And they're excited to do something that day. And they're gonna get up and be happy that they're alive, or going to play with their friends, or whatever it might be. They're excited to get up, and they get up with a purpose. And we lose that at some point. And it's really quite sad. And I think a lot of us do not spend enough time thinking about how the life choices we make impact that. So I myself lost this ability to wake up and love my life for many, many years in between when I was a child, and can finally say I wake up and am excited to do something these days again, whether it's seeing my animals, whether it's going to my job. I really do love what I do. But I think that this passion is something that is so important for people to have, because if you don't love what you do, you're going to feel burdened by it. And if you do love what you do, you will never work a day in your life. That's an old saying, but it's really quite true. So we're going to fast forward a little bit on the timeline, and I'm now 10 years old, sitting at a birthday party with my little sister. And she and I are at the Brunswick Zone at this birthday party. And we're a little bored with bowling. We're 10, we have short attention spans. But we get bored with the bowling, and so we wander off into the arcade game section of Brunswick Zone. And we pass by this giant LCD screen of, these 4 seats, 2 rows, and I'm like, see horses. And you'll see this is a recurring theme throughout my examples. I am absolutely obsessed with horses to this day. I've still not lost that. But, so I'm like, I gotta figure out what this is. And this was Derby Owners Club, World Edition. And I sat down and I started to play. And this was actually a really cool arcade game where it would print you cards, and you could come back and play with the same horse, and you could collect them and trade them with your friends and try to get really interesting coats and all that. And the horses had different statistics. And they were pretty simplistic, but they had like speed, stamina, power, but there was another one, and it was called tenacity. And I noticed that the ones who had high tenacity tended to come and win the races, despite the horses they were up against having quite a lot more in terms of speed or power or strength. And they would do it in such an interesting fashion. They would often fly past the other horses right at the end of the race. And 10-year-old me doesn't know what tenacity is, so I go home and I open the dictionary. And tenacity is grit or perseverance. And so then it all made sense, right? Because what they were essentially doing was, when all the other horses had gone fast at the beginning of the race, at the wrong end of the race, they saved their second wind for the finish line. And that's how they were able to win. And this is actually a mentality we can adopt in our lives. And this is one I've adopted in my own life as a way of reframing failures. So I'm sure we've all heard of Overwatch and are probably, we're a little more in the modern day now, familiar with Zenyatta, the character from Overwatch. So Zenyatta, the name, was actually originally coined from an album by the Police. There was an album called Zenyatta Mandata. And it's also a horse. She was one of the most famous racehorses of all time. And she is the epitome of this running style I'm describing to you from the Derby Owners Club, where she will come from behind and win. And she's an icon, not only because of that, but because she was one of the few female racehorses who ran and won against the boy racehorses routinely. She ran 20 races and won 19. She's virtually unbeaten. And we're actually going to watch what I'm talking about here. So this is the second half of what is her most famous race. This is the 2009 Breeders' Cup Classic. And she's going to be all the way at the back there, second from the last in the green silks. And she is just incredibly awesome to watch because she's going to make them all look like they're standing still because she's smart and talented and knows how to use her skills. So we'll just watch her. So she's like in the middle now. She's going to come all the way around the outside. She's all the way on the outside. In the last like couple hundred meters, makes them all look like they're standing still. And she wins. She was the first one that was a female horse to win this race. And I mentioned she ran 19 races and won, or she ran 20 races and won 19. The only one she ever lost was her second attempt at this one by a nose. So this is a mentality we can adopt in our life. And we have more options in our life too because we don't have this fixed finish line. She's working with a fixed finish line here. And so oftentimes when I find myself thinking in the way of, oh, I've just failed at this, I have not done this well, whatever this might be, I will reframe it as this is a feedback. This is not failure, this is feedback of what I could do better. And we're not at the finish line yet because there's multiple paths to the finish line in real life. And so it's a great mentality to adopt across the board in your life. And it served me quite well. And this is why I prefaced the whole talk by saying anybody who claims to know everything is not somebody I particularly would want to listen to. I can give you examples of what's worked for me, people and things from my life and morals and in ways I understand and find relatable. And, try what works for you, leave what doesn't, and, would love to hear, how these will impact your life. So in middle school, I started designing games. So I'm like 14 years old and I'm already starting designing games. So I would take this notebook. This is actually a picture of the notebook that was the design for my very first video game. And I would take this notebook to my study hall and I would, write the stories and write up stats for characters. And these two screenshots on the right here are actual weapon and shield designs I did for this, game concept. It was called Demigods versus Aliens, and it was going to be an open world game where you could play as a demigod or you could play as an alien. Never made it to production, but it was a great learning experience. I actually rendered at 14 and did these designs on the sword and shield myself. So it was a great introduction to some of the art pipelines, some of the game tools that people use to this day. So again, I was in middle school, and the middle schoolers thought this was the absolutely most hilarious thing ever. So I'd walk out of my study hall with my binder and notebook, and they'd be like, middle schoolers, right? So they're like, ha ha ha, that's so funny, right? Like pushes your books on the ground. And I was miserable. I would come home and I would cry because they made me feel terrible about, what was really exciting to me. And this is where I'm going to credit one of the most amazing mentor figures I was very lucky to have in my life at the time. It was my mom. And my mom was an engineer, still is an engineer, and that is firmly where I believe I had gotten the idea that I could be one. So there were and are hard days along the way, but never was it a question of could I be an engineer. And a lot of the thought principles and mindset work that I am teaching you here today, or at least bringing to you to your attention, are a result of my mom knowing about them. So I learned about them from somebody, and that was a mentor to me. And so, but I would come home and I would cry, and this was where I started learning about these principles. My mom started teaching me how to reframe things, how to, think of them not as failures, how to, reposition negative thoughts so that I could go back to something I did believe in and reframe it as a positive thought. And that served me and still serves me very well. So then, I'm out of middle school, going into high school, it's a little better. I have my friend group, and, I think we've all had an experience of somebody who just broke our heart. So I had this person in high school, and I remember to the point where we broke up, and he wasn't even hearing a word I said. And so I'm sitting there like, you don't love me, and he's playing League of Legends. And I left. I walked out the door, but I remember the last thing I said was that I would make the games he played one day. And it was like 16-year-old sassy me setting that goal subconsciously because I was upset. And it came from a place of good intent, right? Like, it came from this place of, I don't want to let him kick me to the dirt. Like, I don't want to let him, knock me down. And so it came from a good intent. It was very poorly executed because that goal carried with it some shame and guilt and ego that I had to make this grand video game the best of the best because somebody else had done me wrong. And while I love video game design, that is the wrong reason to do that, to do anything, because somebody else told you to. So again, as I look back on that period from a more well-centered version of me and a more balanced period of my life, I see that goal that was set at that time there came a point where it was no longer serving me. Like, yes, it kicked off my public speaking career. Yes, like, I did get into some game design and run my own game design team in college. But there came a point where I was trying to manage schoolwork for my computer science degree and the game design team and an internship and a part-time job and, still have friends. And I was just crippling. And that was the point where I was like, this is no longer serving me. This goal I set 5 years ago is no longer serving me. And I was like, I don't have to make the most grand video game ever alone, either, right? And in fact, I would like to teach I want to do something I'm happy with, something that brings me joy. And so this was sort of the pivot point of me trying to adopt that mentality I had as a child where I woke up and was happy to go about my day. So I want to do something that brings me joy, but I also want to teach others how to do that and how to think in ways that will get them to that point. I mentioned that I did do a lot of game design in college, and I also had 3 different internships in college. And Chris, who coordinates GDEX every year and runs multivarious games, he may or may not know the full story of how I actually ended up here at GDEX 5 years ago. So I had an internship, my very first one of the 3, at a big name oil and gas company. And it was not a good match for me. I'm a big fan of the environment and of clearly of caring for and assisting people, and it just wasn't a good match. They had me also not sit with the other interns. They had me off in this section with the contractors. And so I was lonely. But there was one good thing that came out of that. And that good thing was that I sat next to the Microsoft representative there. And he happened to notice I was super passionate about building video games. And he was like, hey, you should meet this person that builds video games, and that person is Chris, and I'll introduce you. And GDEX 5 years ago was much smaller than it is today, and it's been awesome to see it grow. So, kudos to everybody who makes that happen year over year. But, so after I was shortly introduced to GDEX and to Chris, and then I started speaking there, and I've been here every year since. Shortly after that, at that job, like I mentioned, at that time in college, under so much stress, managing 5 different items at once, and I stopped showing up to that job. And I was ultimately let go from that job. And for somebody who their definition of success and of on time is you are here 5 minutes early. You are like, a straight A student, right? That's like an incredibly shameful thing to say. And I came back from it. I, had 2 more internships. Like I said, I'm well established in my field these days. But at the time, it was one of the most crippling blows, and I could have chosen to, crumble under it. And instead, when I look back at it, that was both one of my biggest failures and one of my greatest successes, because had I never taken that job, had I never been let go from that job, I would never also be standing here for you today. I would not have a public speaking career. I would not have been at 5, years of GDEX. So it's, again, this shift from seeing something as failure to seeing it as feedback or an opportunity to look at another route. And something I also struggled with through college was to define, reality. And I think we oftentimes think that this is way more clear than it is. So really, reality is subjective, because we can go back to middle school biology here, where they're going to tell you the brain is what coordinates your nervous system reactions and all that. But where people don't typically analyze this is your brain, the same system, system that's going to send out all your nervous and fear reactions, is the same system that is going to be analyzing your environment for what to be nervous and fearful about. So you have the same system reacting that's analyzing. And so this is perhaps best represented by this Everest and keyhole view analogy. So you can have 2 people, and we ask them, maybe they're playing escape the room or something, and we ask them to both look through the keyhole of the door. And they're both going to notice something different. If you ask both those people, what did you notice? Well, one might have noticed the street, one might have noticed all the plants or everything that was the color green, and they're both going to come back with different information. So you expand that view to they're both standing on the top of Mount Everest, and I guarantee you one of them will be looking at the clouds, and one will be looking and wondering when they're going to fall to the bottom of the mountain. And I guarantee you that the one looking at the clouds is not going to be having the same fear response that the one looking at the ground is. So we can have 2 people in the exact same situation, in the exact same spot, and their response to it is going to be shaped by how their perspective of it is. And this is a really interesting, the basis of a really interesting theory in social and communication theory, and it's called standpoint theory. And I highly recommended further reading on that if you would like, but it's basically a theory that says that our view of the world is colored by our standpoint, so where we are and how we see it. And so once we know where we are and how we see things, we can start to define boundaries. And a lot of people struggle with defining boundaries. Oftentimes you'll ask people, well, where is your boundaries? And they're like, I don't know what boundaries. Like that was me for, up until quite recently, actually. And so to begin to define boundaries, you have to know where the boundary is between helping yourself and helping somebody else. Because you can only, by definition, help somebody when you have, with what you have available in your own self. With whatever resources or knowledge you have, you can only give to somebody else what you have available in your own self. And so one of the most relatable analogies I've heard to explain boundaries is this one of this tree. So say you live in a subdivision, you're in a small neighborhood, and you have, relatively small plots of land. And your neighbor, their tree, falls into your yard. And the question is, whose job is it to pick it up? Well, most people would argue that it's the neighbor's job because it's the neighbor's tree and the roots of it are in the neighbor's yard. Now you, given that you liked your neighbor, could choose to assist with cleaning it up or cleaning up the portion that was in your yard. But that's a choice you make, given knowing where a boundary is. And that's honestly one of the most relatable analogies I've heard on boundaries, because it was sort of like, oh, yeah, right? Like when you put it in a way that's very, everybody's been there, or, could imagine that, yeah, that's what a boundary is. And so we can then clearly tell what is mine versus what is yours. And it's honestly possible to have two different opinions on the same subject from the same person, too, just as it is to have two people have two separate perspectives. So a good example of this is masks. So everybody's wearing a mask. Before 2019, if somebody said, well, somebody in a mask walked into the coffee shop, or somebody in the mask walked into a bank, the insinuation was that they were going to shoot people and hold up the bank or the coffee shop. Now somebody says, oh, somebody in a mask walked into the coffee shop, and they're the insinuation is something about COVID, right? They're following the rules. So it's context, but another good example is the women's rights debate that's been going on in Texas. So they passed one of the most restrictive laws regarding abortion. And I'm not here to argue who's right and who's wrong, but simply to point out that it is possible as a well-centered human being to hold two separate opinions on this and any other philosophical matter. For example, you could hold the opinion of yourself, what you would do given the situation, given you were in this situation, and you could hold for the group, for others, a different standpoint, given that you do not know their perspective, their standpoint, where they're coming at it from, and what would be most helpful to them from a moral, ethical standpoint. And again, I'm not here to tell people what they should or should not believe, but simply to point out it is possible to have two separate opinions. And leads me into perceived value. So we've all been or had that friend who is consistently, we're back to this, they're unhappy with their job, they're unhappy with their life, but they stay there. They're very, very content to settle for being unhappy with their life, job, relationship, whatever it might be. And they just won't get out. And we're like, well, we can see that this friend has so much higher value to us than they see themselves for. And if nothing else, I hope that some of the thoughts and mindset tricks I've shared here today will help you or your friends begin to shift this sense of value for yourself. But the reason that I believe so many people get stuck not doing anything about and just essentially settling is they know they're settling, and it's against their integrity and their values. But the reason they get stuck is because it is safe. It is certainly sure that if you stay where you are, you will still be there. But if you go somewhere else, out of the situation, to a new job, wherever it might be, it is uncertain. You might fail. You might end up some super awesome place nobody's ever gone before, but you might fail. And so with everything, there's a cost, and the cost of going is often much more apparent. We think about it as like, oh, I could, leave this job, and I could totally, fail at a bunch of things. And we like to frame the negative side of action and the positive side of doing nothing. And really, there's a flip side to both of those. So there's a positive side to action, and you could an exercise you could do if you wanted to, analyze this for yourself is have a choice that you would like to make or something you've been tossing around in your head for yourself. Write it down, and then write down what is all the benefits to doing this, and then write down what is the cost to not doing it. Because there's an opportunity cost to not doing anything just as much as there is to doing it. So it's going to challenge you to think a different way. And when you start writing things down, you get them out of your head, and you find that your head is clearer to think about other things. So when you start writing things down just on paper generally, your mind is freed up to do other things. So another tool I love is just when I find my head spinning all over the place in a given day, I just take it a piece of paper and I just write down this, and just do a brain dump. It doesn't have to be organized. It doesn't have to be, bullet pointed. Just write down everything. I got to go to the grocery store. I got to, this is bothering me. I have homework at 5. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be organized, but it's out of your head. And so when you pops back into your head later, you can go back and be like, I already wrote that down. It's I don't have to remember it anymore. And I found that to be really helpful to me. But I know about the opportunity and the opportunity cost and the real struggle it causes people because my last job, I worked at a big consulting company, and I loved it there. I loved the technical work. And they gave me, as part of my training, this piece of software that was proof of concept. And it essentially been sitting on a dusty shelf. And they were like, just play with it, have some fun. Well, I got that piece of software to the point where it was marketable. And they sold it to finish off that product to one of their clients for almost $500 million. And I was given a team, and I was leading a team of junior developers, and it was wonderful. Except for that company above me, there was a lot of values I did not agree with. There was bureaucracy, and just belittlement of people, micromanagement. And so at the end of the day, my team was happy because I was sort of their shield, but I'd go home and I, again, would be miserable. And so at the end of the day, I had a decision to make. Here were the things I loved about this job, and here were the things I did not. And ultimately, I was making a lot of other people happy at that job, and I loved the technical work. But it was not in my best interest to stay because I was miserable. I was going home miserable. So I left, and as I stated at the beginning of this talk, I work as a cloud platform engineer. And so that leads me into, oftentimes, we think in the future sometime, we will be this. We will do that. And that's good. But you have to have a clear picture of where you are now and a clear picture of where you would like to go in order for that to be effective. And you have to make consistently choices going in that direction. A lot of people get stuck because they do nothing, because they either aren't certain of their starting point, they aren't certain of their finish point, or they feel like they're stuck and like they have to do giant leaps at a time. Just do something to go the right general direction of your target goal, and to do something every day, and you'll get there, right? You're the sum of the choices you make every day of your life. And the way I like to frame this to people is when there's been a lot of research done where they've asked elderly people, what is their biggest regret? And it's often not. It's not doing something, not going for something, not asking somebody something. And it is almost never the things that they did do and messed up. So it brings me back to the now of people will put a lot of effort into maintaining smoke and mirrors and living in Oz because of the certainty that they will still have everything that they have right now. They'll still be where they are today. But what is the cost of that? Again, you will not go anywhere other than where you are currently at. So I mentioned that several examples from my own life and integrity and values and how did I know when to walk from that consulting story. And I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit, and we're going to watch a clip from another horse game I played growing up. This is called Horses. And this is one of the most stereotypical evil characters you could possibly get. He's very evil. We'll watch. Oh, he doesn't have sound. Well, there's subtitles. He's so much better with sound, though. Highly recommend watching him with sound. Anyway, we'll skip him. He's really, the reason I picked him was because he's a great example, if you watch that clip, he's a great example of a very stereotypical evil character, as I said. But what's also in that clip is a very good example, albeit stereotypical, of somebody as an ally. So essentially what ends up happening in that clip that I skipped that you can't hear is that the blonde man essentially is trying to prove that the evil guy has, poor intent and is trying to snatch away this star student from this opposing academy. And the opposing student, or the star student, is actually listening. So she's listening to this whole conversation, and she comes and she walks out at the end and she's like, I'm not riding for you. I won't do it because your values are not good. So I really wanted to play that clip for y'all with the sound because it's just so much better when you can hear the voice actors. But it leads me into allyship and duality again. So we oftentimes think of people as either or, like they're either for us or against us, when oftentimes there's a lot of people that are wanting to help us but really just don't know how. And if we ask them for help, they would love to help us. And that's where allyship comes into play. And oftentimes, again, back to this clip, the people in power are misusing the power, right? So power itself is a tool where it itself is neither good nor evil, but its user makes it so. And so the loudness of the speaker and their commitment to their topic, or hesitation regarding their topic or leadership, is something that we listen to. And also repetition of ideas. So when people repeat ideas to us over and over again from our childhood onward, we tend to believe them and we internalize them, whether we believe it to be true consciously or not. We've had ideas like programmed into us that we've just been told and told and told since we were young. And so you can either choose to stay with those current ideas with certainty, or pick new ones for yourself after you analyze if they are helping you or not, and go and see if those will help you more. And it's always a constant revision process. You can go that way with uncertainty, but if you choose to do something different, you can always do something different again after that. Again, all that matters is you are really just going the right way. So a lot of people get stuck at, here's point A, here's point B, like I have to do the jump in 3 hops. Well, no, like you just take small steps every day consistently. You change your thoughts, you change your actions the same way they got there, which is repetition. You repeat them, the ones you want, over and over and over again. It's something that sounds so simple when I say it, but we often don't think about it. It's not at the forefront of our mind. So I have this little cartoon here at the end of, you can read it, but it's essentially, it's a good analogy about the pitchfork people and the torch people. And we oftentimes are so quick to judge people. We assume people to be something based on their presentation of themselves. And really, people can be more than one thing. So again, back to duality. We can be multifaceted people, and we should be multifaceted, complex people, because the world has a lot of really complex problems that are going to need to be solved that can only be solved by grounded, multifaceted, complex people. And with that, this is how you can get in touch with me further. I would love to hear from anybody who does try any of my ideas, suggestions, or implement them in their lives. I would love to hear how it works for you. I would love to hear what doesn't work for you so I can refine my next talk or help other people with another route to what might work for them. You can also, if you did like what I had to say, despite the technical difficulties, you can go to thought-bound.com/services. And I do routinely do speaking events like this, and I also have available on that link, there is a link to book a free 30-minute coaching call with me where I will go through stuff like this with you personally and outline whether it's for your career or your personal life or whatever. I will outline a way to achieve your goals, and after the free 30-minute call, you can choose to progress on, and I will mentor or coach you. There's also the opportunity for group sessions. So if you have one or two friends who would love to have a mentor or work through some goals and opportunities together, you can get a reduced rate on mentoring. And you definitely should keep an eye on the site, because in addition to the one-on-one mentoring and speaking, I am planning on rolling out a service on the site where I will teach people to code via videos. And it's going to be really cool because it's going to be a lot of analogies, just like you heard here today. And with that, these are all the credits for the lovely games displayed here today. We are honestly 5 minutes over time, but I would love to hear any questions via that email. Thank you all.